Policemen, white, armed, and arrogant, stepped out of their cruiser like they owned the world. Their boots hit the pavement like hammers, heavy with the confidence of unchecked power. A black man was pumping gas into a sleek, midnight black luxury car, nothing flashy, just polished and quiet, like the man himself. But in their eyes, that car couldn't belong to him. Not someone who looked like that. And right there, on a calm, ordinary morning, in an affluent neighborhood with trimmed hedges and cameras on every corner, they decided that he was a criminal. Not because of evidence. Not because of any report. But because of the color of his skin. One officer stepped forward, hand already on his holster, voice loaded with accusation before a single word had been exchanged. "Whose car is this, huh? You steal it from your boss." The man stayed calm, his face unreadable, his hands visible. He raised an eyebrow, then slowly reached for his wallet. But that was already too much movement. "Hands where I can see them." "Now," barked the second officer, already halfway to drawing his weapon. The man didn't resist. He stood still. Calm. Not scared. Not panicked. Just disappointed. Like he'd seen this movie before. Like he'd memorized the script. But nothing prepared him for what came next. They slammed him against the hood of the car. Cuffed him right there as traffic rolled by. Cameras in hands. Whispers. A child pointing. A woman gasping. And still, the man said nothing. Not a single word. Until they shoved him into the back of the squad car. Then came the line that would later echo across courtrooms, newsrooms, and millions of living rooms across America. "You boys just made the biggest mistake of your careers." But at that moment, they laughed. They mocked his tone. "Oh, what are you gonna do, sue us?" one of them snorted. "Man, you should be thanking us. We're saving the world from another thug pretending to be somebody." Another chimed in, bet he borrowed that suit from a donation bin. They patted each other on the back like they'd done something noble, like they were heroes keeping the streets clean. They called it a routine stop. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that this man, this silent, composed figure they just humiliated in broad daylight, was not just another face. He was not just another black man. He was the man. The architect of the very department they worked under. The highest-ranking official in the city's police force. A man appointed just 2 weeks prior to implement a historic, unprecedented policy, a zero-tolerance mandate on racial profiling, police misconduct, and abuse of power. And they had just become the first example. They didn't check his ID. They didn't ask for registration. They didn't even give him a chance to speak. Their actions were so deeply rooted in assumption, in hate disguised as authority, that they missed every single warning sign in front of them. Because when you're convinced someone doesn't belong, you don't bother asking who they really are. And that mistake, that blind certainty, was about to destroy everything they thought they controlled. Back at the station, paperwork started moving. A young intern glanced at the name on the intake form and nearly dropped his clipboard. Phones started ringing. 1 call turned into 5. 5 became 20. Panic spread like wildfire. The chief wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't on vacation. He wasn't unreachable. He was in custody. And the entire command structure was about to flip on its head. Outside, word spread fast. Someone had filmed the entire arrest. Clear audio. Faces. Voices. Every insult. Every laugh. It hit social media before the officers even got back from lunch. And the city watched in real time as the truth surfaced. But here's what's worse, the injustice didn't end there. Because instead of apologizing, instead of admitting failure, a few tried to cover it up. Forge the report. Alter timestamps. Erase footage. Make it look like he had resisted. That's when the trap snapped shut. Because this man wasn't just the director. He was the man who wrote the surveillance reform protocol. Every corner of that gas station. Wired. Every second of their arrest. Archived. They didn't just get caught, they walked into the very system he designed to catch cops like them. And still, despite everything, despite the chain of command, the national attention, the public outrage, the man said nothing. No press conference. No retaliation. Not yet. He waited. Patient. Poised. Calculated. Because he knew something they didn't. He knew how this had to play out. Not for revenge. But for history. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every black man who'd ever been stopped for, fitting the description. Every black woman called aggressive for defending her voice. Every black child taught to keep their hands visible and voice low. This wasn't personal. It was systemic. And now, finally, he had proof. But what happens when the very institution built to protect turns its back on its own truth? When justice becomes a threat to those who wear the badge? What happens when the man they tried to erase becomes the headline that ends careers, rewrites policy, and burns the veil of silence to the ground? You think they lost their jobs? Maybe. You think they got arrested? Possibly. But what actually happened to those officers, how the man they humiliated turned that moment into a storm that would tear the department apart, that is what no one expected. And the way he did it? The way he stood in front of a press room, months later, looked straight into the camera, and finally told the world who he was, that moment is the reason you're going to want to stay until the very end of this story. Because justice isn't just about what's right. Sometimes, it's about who's ready. And when the truth comes out, will you be ready for it? Shall we begin? Before we begin, we want to speak directly to every black viewer watching this. Here at Plough of Twist, we stand firmly against all forms of racism, discrimination, and injustice. Your life, your presence, and your dignity matter deeply. This channel exists to tell stories that reflect reality, expose injustice, and uplift voices that deserve to be heard. Now, sit back. You're about to hear a story that's going to hit hard, inspire even harder, and remind the world that karma never misses. Make sure to subscribe to Plough of Twist and turn on notifications, you won't want to miss the next twist. Enjoy the story. Andre Davis didn't wear his success like a badge. He wasn't loud about his accomplishments. He didn't need to be. Every room he entered, every meeting he led, every conversation he commanded, his presence alone was enough to demand attention. Born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, Andre had carved a life from grit and silence, from discipline and calculated observation. His mother, Lorraine, worked double shifts as a nurse at VCU Medical Center. His father, a former Marine turned security guard, never missed a Sunday service or a chance to remind Andre that a black man in America didn't have the luxury of mistakes. They won't forgive you for the things they'd overlook in others, his father used to say. Andre listened. He always listened. From the time he was young, Andre knew that control was power. Not control over others, but over himself. Over his reactions. His choices. His path. While other kids in his block learned to outrun police sirens or drown out the buzz of helicopters with headphones, Andre buried his head in books. He studied law enforcement like it was a foreign language, one he intended to master better than anyone. By 28, he had 2 degrees, including a master's in criminal justice from Howard. By 32, he had moved through internal affairs faster than any officer in recent city history. And by 40, Andre Davis had become the new director of police operations for the city of Richmond. But that title came with more weight than glory. Richmond wasn't just another city, it was a landscape scarred by history, with Confederate monuments still haunting corners of its streets and a police department long criticized for its unchecked bias. Andre didn't step into the role for prestige. He accepted it because he had a vision. One that didn't just punish corruption but uprooted it. Not just a promise of reform, but a war against the quiet culture of impunity that festered behind closed doors. That vision wasn't popular. Among the higher-ups who'd spent years protecting one another, Andrei was a threat. To the officers who believed brotherhood meant never being held accountable, Andrei was a traitor in a suit. They called him too polished, too proper, too political. But none of that mattered to him. He wasn't there to be liked. He was there to dismantle an institution that had forgotten who it served. At home, he lived alone. No wife. No kids. Not anymore. A divorce 5 years back had taught him that you can't build change in the world without it costing something personal. But he had a niece, Alyssa, 16 and fiery, who called every Sunday and told him which of his speeches went viral on TikTok. She was proud of him. And that mattered more than any promotion. Andrei kept routines. Early gym. Quiet breakfast. Read reports before sunrise. No entourage. No limo. He believed a leader should walk the same streets as the people he served. That's why he drove himself, always. Even when his staff insisted he take a driver for security reasons. He ignored them. Not out of pride, but principle. He wanted to be seen. Present. Accessible. That morning started like any other. Gray hoodie. Dark jeans. No badge on display. Just Andrei being Andrei, unrecognizable without the formal wear and podium. He'd been on the road early, heading to a briefing with the mayor about a new department-wide policy rollout. The most ambitious yet. A zero-tolerance approach to misconduct with built-in accountability layers, public transparency reports, and officer evaluations tied to community feedback. A policy that would make it harder for racist behavior to survive under the badge. It was radical. And long overdue. He stopped for gas at an upscale station on the West End, a part of town where stairs lingered a little longer if your skin tone didn't match your license plate. He was used to it. He didn't flinch anymore. He tapped his card, slid the nozzle into place, and leaned against his sleek, black Genesis. Not flashy, but elegant. A car that said, earned, not, show off. Then the cruiser pulled in. 2 officers. White. Mid-30s. Local patrol. The kind that had been written up before but never disciplined. Andrei recognized the one in the passenger seat. Officer Jennings. Big guy. Loud mouth. Known for making off-the-record comments about cleaning up the trash. The driver, Officer Ray Burke, was newer to the force but already had a reputation for being assertive in questionable neighborhoods. They parked diagonally across the pump, cutting off the exit lane like it was a crime scene. Their eyes scanned Andrei like he was a suspect before they even opened their doors. Andrei didn't move. He kept both hands visible. He knew this dance. The first step was always silence. Burke approached first. This your vehicle? Andrei raised his eyebrow. Yes. Jennings followed with a smirk. Mind showing some ID, sir? We got a report of a car matching this description being stolen not long ago. There had been no such report. Andrei knew that. But he didn't argue. He reached slowly for his wallet, maintaining eye contact, calm as stone. Jennings snatched it before Andrei could fully extend it. You hesitated. That's suspicious. I hesitated because I value my life, Andrei replied. Jennings didn't like the tone. Step away from the car. Andrei blinked. Am I being detained? You're resisting. That's all it took. They moved fast. One held his arm. The other went for his shoulder. Within seconds, he was face first against the hood. Gas still pumping. People watching. A phone lifted across the street, already recording. The nozzle slipped from the tank and clattered onto the pavement, spilling fuel. Nobody stopped it. His heart didn't race. His breath stayed steady. But something deep inside cracked, not fear, not shame, but fury. Not because of what they did. But because of what it meant. Because it wasn't about him. It was about all the others they had done this to. The ones who didn't have titles. The ones who couldn't fight back. They threw him in the back of the cruiser. Cold cuffs biting his wrists. Jennings laughed. Bet he thought driving a nice car made him somebody. Burke responded, they always think they can blend in when they clean up nice. Neither of them knew. Back at the precinct, chaos would soon unravel. But in that moment, all Andre did was sit in silence. Not defeated. But calculating. Not a victim. A witness. To a machine he had spent years warning them about. And now, they had handed him everything he needed to bring it down. What they didn't know was that a single mistake, this moment, this arrest, wasn't going to be a stain on his record. It was going to be the spark that exposed every rotten thread tied to their badges. The irony wasn't lost on him. The men who'd accused him of stealing a car were about to learn what it felt like to have everything taken. But that would come later. For now, the world would see what it meant when power went unchecked, when hate wore a uniform, and when the man they tried to silence became the voice they could no longer ignore. Because the rules were about to change. And Andre Davis wasn't just a name behind a desk anymore. He was the beginning of something none of them were ready for. The cold metal of the cuffs hadn't left his skin yet when Andre Davis was walked into the station like a ghost wearing a body of silence. Every hallway he crossed, every glance from officers who didn't recognize him out of uniform, served as one more reminder of what this building had become, a place where power replaced principles, and familiarity had bred not respect, but negligence. The officers who arrested him filled out forms like they were logging another petty thief, laughing under their breath and casually tossing words like resisting and aggressive into their report, unaware that every keystroke was laying a trap for their own careers. Andre sat in the holding room, his posture straight, his gaze steady. He didn't speak unless asked. He didn't argue. He knew exactly what needed to happen next, and rushing it would only dilute the impact. Timing was everything. Meanwhile, the ripple had already begun. A young officer named Carter, fresh out of academy and working reception, had double-checked the booking form and froze. His eyes darted back to the screen, then to the holding room monitor. His heart skipped. He stood up, hesitated, then made a decision that would change his life. He walked, fast but careful, to the administrative wing, where Assistant Chief Mendoza was reviewing internal budgets. She barely looked up until he said the name. Then she stood, her face going pale, and grabbed her phone. In another part of the building, Officer Burke was leaned against the wall, sipping coffee and laughing with Jennings about how the guy thought he was above the law just 'cause he spoke like a college professor. Jennings chuckled, he'll probably sue, maybe cry a little on the news. We'll get a slap on the wrist, couple days off. I could use the break. But before their coffee cooled, Mendoza stormed into the squad room, her voice sharp, where is he? No one needed to ask who she meant. She didn't wait for an answer. Jennings blinked, confused, while Burke straightened up slightly, sensing something shift in the air. Andre sat alone when Mendoza burst into the room, followed by Carter. The door slammed behind them. She looked at him, speechless for a second, then exhaled sharply. Sir. I had no idea. He raised a hand, calm and precise. Don't apologize. Just listen carefully. He stood slowly, the weight of authority returning to his shoulders like armor. Right now, we're going to handle this quietly, by protocol. I want to speak with the Internal Oversight Committee before anything leaks. His voice was steady, controlled, but his eyes burned with something she hadn't seen in him before. Not rage. Not vengeance. Purpose. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. The command center was in panic mode. A meeting was called. High-ranking officers filled the conference room with tight jaws and darting glances. Some knew what had happened. Others had only heard whispers. But once André entered the room, back in his tailored navy suit, cuffs gone but not forgotten, the truth wrapped around every heart like a cold chain. He stood at the head of the table. Earlier today, he began, I was detained and humiliated by 2 members of this department. I didn't identify myself. I didn't resist. I let them show me exactly who they are when they believe no one's watching. No one interrupted. No one dared. This is not about me. This is about the culture that allows this kind of behavior to flourish. And that culture ends today. The room was silent. Someone cleared their throat. Chief Holloway, an older man with years of service and a reputation for political neutrality, finally spoke. Sir, with respect, we have to contain this. If this goes public, André cut him off, it is going public. But on our terms. And with full accountability. He scanned the faces in the room. Some looked away. Others clenched their jaws. I'm not here to destroy this department. I'm here to save it. And if that means exposing every unchecked bias and every whispered joke behind closed doors, so be it. Later that evening, André sat alone in his office, staring at the security footage retrieved from the gas station. Clear video. Clear audio. Every word documented. He watched it twice. Not to remind himself of the humiliation, but to study the mechanics of power in action, how easily it warped, how quickly it dehumanized. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to no one, they think I was the one who got caught. Outside his office, tension rippled through the building. Officer Burke was pacing in the hallway, his face pale. He had finally been told who André was. Jennings, on the other hand, was defensive, still convinced it was some kind of setup. How was I supposed to know? He barked at his supervisor. He didn't say who he was. He looked like what? The supervisor asked sharply. Jennings froze. No words came out. The air between them thickened. André called for a closed-door meeting with both officers. They entered, shoulders tense, eyes avoiding his. André didn't sit. He stood, arms folded. Do you know why I brought you here? Jennings opened his mouth. Sir, you're not here to speak. You're here to listen, André interrupted. You didn't just arrest a man. You exposed a virus inside this system. A virus I've spent years trying to identify. And you brought it to me, right into my hands. Burke looked genuinely shaken. Sir, I didn't mean, André looked him dead in the eyes. But you did it. That's the point. Neither of them spoke after that. André dismissed them with a single gesture. But the real reckoning hadn't started yet. That was still coming. Over the next few days, André worked quietly, gathering reports, compiling evidence. HR logs. Prior complaints. Incident records. A pattern emerged. These weren't 2 bad apples. They were part of a decaying branch. Officers with records of misconduct, passed over again and again. Whispers of harassment. A joke here, a slur there. All swept under the rug. All part of the culture. André met with legal advisors, civil rights advocates, and media consultants. He planned a public release, not for drama, but for change. But before he could move, the pressure started from within. Anonymous messages. Internal resistance. People warning him to back off, to let it go, to take the win quietly. But André had already decided. This wasn't about a win. It was about a purge. Meanwhile, media had started picking up on something brewing. Unidentified high-ranking officer allegedly profiled by patrol cops, read a local blog. Rumors swirled, but nothing confirmed. Inside the department, phones buzzed and eyes watched every move André made. Some feared him now. Others admired him more than ever. Assistant Chief Mendoza approached him late one night, her face tired but firm. "You know they're going to come for you if you go public with this, right?" He nodded. "Let them come." She paused, then added, "You're going to burn it all down." He looked at her, eyes fierce with quiet conviction. "Only the parts that deserve it." What Andrei was planning wasn't revenge. It was revelation. But he knew he had to be careful. Strategic. Surgical. Because if he moved too fast, they'd call it a personal vendetta. If he moved too slow, the momentum would vanish. But the city needed to see. The community needed to know. And the department needed to change, or be dismantled from the inside. Everything had been prepared for the official rollout of the new accountability policy, scheduled for the following Monday. What no one knew was that Andrei had rewritten the speech. He had rewritten the entire rollout. Because what was coming wasn't just policy, it was justice. And the moment he walked onto that stage, and the world learned the truth about what had happened, not just to him but through him, everything would change. But one question still lingered in the minds of those watching from the shadows, those fearing what Andrei might reveal next. What exactly did he know about them? Monday morning broke with a silence that felt like the eye of a storm. The streets around City Hall were still, but inside, a fire was building, quiet, controlled, and ready to ignite. Reporters crowded near the front steps, microphones poised like weapons. Phones were lifted, cameras blinked red. Across social media, anticipation pulsed. Every major outlet had picked up the whispers over the weekend. The rumor was now a fact: the director of police operations had been wrongfully arrested by officers under his own command, and today, he would speak publicly for the first time since the incident. But what no one knew, not the press, not the department, not even his closest allies, was just how deep Andrei Davis planned to cut. The press conference was set on the third floor, in a glass-walled chamber with a view of the city skyline. Rows of chairs were filled. Members of the department sat stiffly, dressed in crisp uniforms, trying to mask their anxiety. Burke sat near the back, his hands locked together so tight his knuckles had turned white. Jennings wasn't there. His attorney had advised him to avoid all contact, especially after he'd made a statement to Internal Affairs blaming the arrest on a misunderstanding. But Burke had shown up. Guilt dripped from every movement he made. Still, he had no idea what was about to happen. The room went quiet as Andrei stepped onto the platform. No notes. No teleprompter. He wore a charcoal suit, his tie a muted navy. His face calm, unreadable, but his eyes held a storm. The silence stretched. Then, he leaned into the mic and spoke. "4 days ago, I was arrested in broad daylight by 2 officers from this department. I did not resist. I did not argue. I did not reveal who I was. I let it happen. Not because I was afraid. But because I needed to see who we really are when we think no one's watching." The audience didn't breathe. I won't recount what they said. The footage has done that already. You've all seen it by now, or you will soon. And no, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for responsibility. He paused, let that word linger in the air like smoke. For the past 6 months, I've led the creation of a new accountability policy, one designed to identify, report, and discipline racial profiling and excessive force. That policy was set to roll out today. But last week changed everything. Because I realized this department is not ready for reform. It's rotting from the inside. Whispers buzzed. Officers shifted in their seats. That's why, over the past 72 hours, I've expanded our review. With the help of the Civilian Oversight Board, internal audits, and third-party legal teams, we've reopened over 40 internal complaints tied to the same 5 precincts. And we found a pattern. He turned, picked up a folder from the podium. Thick. Heavy. Slammed it down with a single motion. Dozens of misconduct reports buried. Bodycam footage disabled. Civilian complaints discarded. Names repeated over and over. Including officers Burke and Jennings. Burke's face turned ghost white. And it's not just them. We have documented evidence of supervisory cover-ups, falsified reports, and strategic reassignment of officers with high complaint volumes into low-income districts. The tension cracked the room like a fault line. Reporters leaned forward, some already typing. Officers stared, faces unreadable. André let them sit in it. Starting today, we are not just implementing a policy. We are executing a full department investigation. Effective immediately, 23 officers are being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Several will be referred for criminal prosecution. Then, his voice dropped. Not softer, but heavier. This is not a moment. It's a movement. And it started when two men assumed that a black man behind the wheel of a luxury car had to be a criminal. From the back, Burke stood up abruptly. The entire room turned. His voice cracked, but he spoke. Sir. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you. I didn't mean. André locked eyes with him. And if it hadn't been me, what would have happened? What would you have done? Burke's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. The silence crushed him harder than any punishment. André didn't flinch. You think the problem was not knowing who I was. But the problem is thinking I needed to be someone for you to treat me with basic humanity. Burke sat back down. Slowly. Ashamed. André turned to the press again. This is not about a title. It's about the belief that some lives are worth more than others depending on who wears the uniform and who doesn't. That ends now. Mendoza stepped forward then, standing just behind him, not speaking but signaling solidarity. She had taken heat for backing him, but her loyalty wasn't to André, it was to justice. And she wasn't alone. One by one, a few officers stood up quietly from their chairs. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. But they stood. And that was enough. As the press conference ended, reporters screamed questions, but André walked away without answering. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to expose. And he had only just begun. Later that afternoon, a citywide email was issued from his office. Attached, a spreadsheet of every officer under review, including timelines, complaint summaries, and projected outcomes. The message was clear, transparency was no longer optional. In the days that followed, community groups rallied. Churches held vigils. News outlets replayed the footage of his arrest alongside clips of his speech. It became a national moment, a mirror held to every city with the same silent infections. But inside the department, chaos simmered. Jennings lawyered up. Officers whispered in corners. Others came forward with stories they'd been too afraid to tell before. One black officer from Precinct 9B submitted a formal complaint detailing how his own partners referred to patrols in black neighborhoods as zoo duty. Another woman officer revealed she'd been threatened into silence after reporting racial slurs in locker rooms. André read every one. He met with each person personally, not as a boss, but as someone who knew exactly what silence cost. And with each conversation, the storm grew. But he didn't fear it. He welcomed it. Because the reckoning wasn't over. Not yet. Something even bigger was coming. And this time, no one would be able to hide behind rank, years of service, or silence. Justice had a face now. And its name was André Davis. The sun had barely risen over Richmond the next morning when the backlash began to take shape. Not from the public, no, the public had already chosen their side. They saw André Davis not as a victim, but as a force of reckoning. His face was plastered across national headlines, his speech shared and quoted like scripture in digital spaces where policy and people rarely intersected. But within the walls of the department, something darker was brewing. Fear disguised as resistance. Loyalty tangled with guilt. There were those who saw the shift and clung tighter to the old ways, whispering in hallways, meeting in back rooms, plotting how to survive what felt like a purge. Andrei knew it. He felt it in the way his office door seemed heavier now when it closed behind him, in the longer silences during staff meetings, in the eyes that refused to meet his as he walked the corridors. That morning, Mendoza came into his office and closed the door without asking. She stood for a moment, watching him as he reviewed disciplinary reports, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. "They're scared," she said quietly. Andrei didn't look up. "Good. They should be." She hesitated. "There's talk about retaliation. Internal sabotage. Officers refusing to cooperate with the policy implementation. Some even considering walkouts." Andrei finally raised his eyes. "Then let them walk. If their allegiance is to the silence, they were never with us." She stepped closer, her voice lower. "But if too many walk, this department collapses. And then what's left?" He stood, slowly. "Then we rebuild. From the ground up. This isn't about saving the old system, Elena. It's about building something new. Something real." She looked at him, her face a blend of respect and worry. "You're not afraid, are you?" Andrei held her gaze. "I've lived afraid my whole life. Afraid to be too loud, too visible, too honest. I'm done with that." Later that day, Andrei called a mandatory staff meeting, no excuses, no exceptions. The room was crowded, tense. Officers who had worn their uniforms like armor now looked uncertain, exposed. Andrei stood before them, not behind a podium this time, but eye to eye, as one of them. "You've heard the rumors," he began. "You've read the headlines. You've seen the footage. So let's stop pretending that this is about one incident, or one man. This is about us. All of us. This is about what we allow, what we ignore, what we protect." A murmur rippled through the room. One officer, Sergeant Reynolds, a 20-year veteran, stepped forward, his face flushed with emotion. "So what, we're all guilty now? Every white cop's a racist? That's what this is?" Andrei didn't blink. "No. But silence is complicity. If you've heard those jokes in the locker room and said nothing, you're part of the problem. If you've seen excessive force and turned your head, you're part of the problem. And if your first reaction to accountability is defensiveness, then maybe it's time to ask yourself why." Reynolds clenched his jaw. "You're painting with a damn wide brush." Andrei stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the room lean in. "I was arrested for looking like someone who didn't belong. I was humiliated by men who thought they were untouchable. And they weren't rookies. They were trained. They wore this badge. This isn't about brushes, Sergeant. It's about mirrors. And if the reflection makes you uncomfortable, that's not my fault." Reynolds didn't respond. He lowered his eyes and stepped back. Then, unexpectedly, Officer Carter, the young recruit who first recognized Andrei, spoke up. His voice was hesitant, but clear. "I joined this department because I believed in what it could be, not what it was. I watched that footage and I couldn't sleep. Not just because it happened, but because part of me wasn't surprised. And that scared me." Andrei nodded slowly. "Thank you." Another voice rose. A black officer near the back. Her name was Harper. She'd been quiet for years, waiting, like so many others, for someone to make space for truth. "I reported harassment 3 years ago," she said. "They said I was exaggerating. Said I was being too sensitive. After that, I kept my mouth shut. But I watched them laugh at you, sir. And I realized, if they can do that to you, what chance do the rest of us have unless something changes?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with breath held, eyes shifting, the slow, grinding recognition of truth settling into the room like a storm cloud. André let it linger before he spoke again. We have a choice. Right here. Right now. We can defend the cracks in this foundation. Or we can tear it down and rebuild something that actually holds. He turned and walked out, not needing applause, not waiting for a response. His words had been enough. But the storm outside was growing. That night, a coordinated leak released the full footage of André's arrest to a national news outlet. It aired without edits, without commentary, just the raw humiliation, the arrogance in the officers' voices, the quiet devastation in André's silence. Social media erupted. Hashtags trended. Protesters gathered outside the station with signs that read, "I am André Davis," and "Protect and Respect." The mayor called an emergency meeting. Community leaders demanded not just accountability but restructuring. Civil rights organizations began legal reviews of the department's history of complaints. Lawsuits were being prepared. The city was waking up. Inside his office, André sat alone, watching the footage one more time. Not to feel the pain again, but to remember why it mattered. The door opened and Burke walked in, uninvited, his face sunken, eyes red. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. André didn't move. "No, you shouldn't." Burke stood there, wringing his hands. "I've been thinking about it every second since. The way I looked at you. The way I didn't see you. I keep trying to figure out when that happened. When I stopped seeing people and started seeing threats." André finally looked at him. It wasn't a moment. It was a choice. Over and over. You chose comfort over conscience. You chose silence. "I'm sorry," Burke whispered. "I'm not the one who needs to hear that," André replied. Burke nodded slowly and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "What happens to us now?" André stared at him. "You face the consequences. Just like anyone else would. That's what justice looks like." Burke walked out without another word. And still, the night stretched ahead, full of noise, full of fire, full of reckoning. André stood at the window and watched the protesters gather, their voices rising like a tide. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stood there, still, like a man who knew that the hardest part wasn't exposing the truth, it was surviving it. And somewhere in that crowd, someone held a sign that simply read, "This isn't over." They were right. It was only the beginning. The days following the press conference didn't bring peace, they brought confrontation. Not in the streets, where the crowds grew louder each night, demanding not just change, but cleansing, nor in the mayor's office, where advisors scrambled to preserve political capital amid mounting pressure from national civil rights groups. The real confrontation took place in quiet rooms, closed-door meetings, and long, sleepless nights in which André Davis found himself staring at lines of policy drafts, misconduct reports, and disciplinary recommendations, documents that now held the weight of entire lives. What had started as personal humiliation had become public reckoning, and with it came a question André couldn't shake, a question heavier than even the silence he'd carried in the back of that patrol car: how far was too far in pursuit of justice? He met with the Civilian Oversight Board in an extended session, presenting findings not just from his own case, but from the cluster of reopened complaints that followed it. He laid out the connections, the missed red flags, the complicity across ranks. But as he spoke, as the evidence piled higher and higher in digital folders and manila envelopes, a new dilemma began to form, a collision between principle and consequence. Several of the officers implicated weren't all like Burke or Jennings. Some had years of service, some had families, some had performed their duties with integrity for long stretches before slowly sliding into negligence or silence. And now, public opinion wanted blood. Headlines demanded firings, not investigations. Hashtags replaced due process with outrage. And André, the face of reform, had become the symbol of both justice and vengeance, depending on who you asked. At a meeting with the city's legal team, one of the senior attorneys leaned forward, voice low, eyes sharp. "You have the support to push this all the way through. But once you go past a certain point, there's no pulling back. The union will come after you. The lawsuits will multiply. And some of the people you're about to name, they're not monsters. They're just men who made bad calls." Andre didn't flinch. Bad calls that cost people their dignity. In some cases, their lives. "Yes," the attorney said. "But if we paint them all with the same brush, we make it impossible to separate reform from revenge. You need to ask yourself, is this about justice? Or is it about winning?" That question haunted him long after the meeting ended. He found himself staring at a wall of photographs, victims, complainants, officers, names, dates. People. Not numbers. Not case files. And it hit him harder than any insult ever could. This wasn't about what he could prove anymore. It was about who would be caught in the blast when the final hammer dropped. And that included people who hadn't spoken up, yes, but it also included those who were simply too scared to. Late one night, Mendoza found him alone in the conference room, the lights dimmed, stacks of paper untouched. "You haven't been home in 3 days," she said. He didn't look up. "There's too much to finish." She sat across from him, the silence between them thick with exhaustion. "You're not wrong to go this far," she said. "But you can't carry it all alone. You're not supposed to." Andre leaned back, rubbed his face. "If I stop now, it all gets watered down. They'll twist the narrative. Say we overreacted. Say I had a grudge. I can't let that happen." "Then let us help you," she said. "Bring others in. Share the weight." He shook his head slowly. "They trusted me to fix this. If I hand it off, it looks like weakness. If I push too hard, it looks like revenge. Either way, I become the story." She didn't argue. Instead, she slid a folder across the table. Inside were testimonials from lower-ranking officers, anonymous, detailed, damning. Some recounted years of bullying and racial jokes. Others spoke of pressure to falsify reports. A few described their superiors using slurs openly, unchecked. It was enough to fuel another investigation entirely. But it also revealed something else: fear had been institutionalized. Compliance had been purchased with silence. Andre read in silence for nearly an hour before closing the folder. "We need to make this public," he said. Mendoza raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yes. But not with names. Not yet. We let the people see the truth. Then we show them how we're going to fix it." And so, another press conference was called. But this one wasn't about shock, it was about strategy. Andre stood behind the podium and laid out the scope of the investigation, the testimonials, the timeline for disciplinary action. He didn't name names. He didn't show footage. Instead, he spoke to the city not as an enforcer, but as a citizen who believed the institution could still be salvaged. "Change isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about accountability. About creating a system where wrongdoing doesn't hide in plain sight. We're not here to destroy. We're here to rebuild." The response was mixed. Some praised his restraint. Others called it weakness. But it didn't matter. The groundwork was laid. And behind the scenes, the real work had begun. Burke voluntarily resigned. His letter was brief but sincere. He requested to speak with Andre one last time before his departure. They met in a small conference room, no cameras, no scripts. Burke sat stiffly, clutching a folded piece of paper. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I wanted to leave something behind. Something real." Andre said nothing as Burke slid the paper across the table. It was a signed affidavit, outlining not just the events of Andre's arrest, but several other instances in which Burke had witnessed misconduct, and said nothing. "I thought if I didn't participate, I wasn't guilty," Burke said. "But silence was my choice. And that choice hurt people." Andre picked up the paper, read it, folded it again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This matters." Burke stood. "I don't know what happens now. But I hope someday, someone remembers that I tried to do one thing right before I left." Andre nodded. "They will." As Burke left the room, Andre looked down at the affidavit, understanding its value, not just as evidence, but as a symbol. A man facing his failure, choosing to leave something honest behind. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, the department underwent a series of rapid changes. New hires were required to pass bias training before stepping into uniform. A rotating civilian audit board was established, with real power to review complaints and push for action. Officers were encouraged, and protected, for reporting internal misconduct. And perhaps most notably, Andre announced the creation of a new division, the Integrity Task Unit. Its mission was simple: to root out the behaviors that led to his own arrest, and to make sure no one else, no matter their rank or race, suffered the same. But even with these changes, resistance lingered. A small group of officers submitted a petition challenging Andre's leadership, accusing him of creating a hostile work environment. The union threatened legal action. A few media outlets, eager for controversy, began questioning his motives again. Andre didn't flinch. He addressed it head-on. "If accountability feels hostile," he said in a follow-up interview, "maybe it's because the environment was too comfortable for the wrong people for far too long." The reporter leaned in. "Do you think the department will survive this?" Andre paused, then smiled, not wide, but sure. "It won't survive unchanged. And that's the point." Outside, the protests had evolved into community forums. Citizens weren't just shouting anymore, they were organizing. They were submitting ideas, policy suggestions, volunteering for review boards. The city wasn't burning, it was building. And amid all this, Andre finally allowed himself a moment of stillness. One night, after a long day of meetings, he walked through the city alone, unrecognized in his hoodie and jeans. He passed the same gas station where it had all started. He didn't stop. Just kept walking. But in his chest, something shifted. Not peace. But purpose. He understood now that the fight wasn't about being right. It was about being relentless. And though the wounds were still raw, though the weight hadn't lifted, he could feel something new stirring. Not resolution. But readiness. Andre sat in the back corner of a small community gymnasium, dressed in civilian clothes, watching as people filled the plastic chairs lined up in front of a makeshift stage. The smell of old wood and fresh paint lingered in the air, the walls still echoing with the sounds of last night's youth basketball game. But tonight, it wasn't about sports. Tonight was the first of the city's public forums, where citizens could speak directly to those in power about the changes sweeping through Richmond's police department. Andre had insisted on it, not as a political gesture, but as a statement of truth, that real reform could not happen behind closed doors. As residents stepped forward to speak, one by one, he didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't defend. He listened. Fully. Deeply. A woman, maybe in her late 50s, took the mic. Her voice shook slightly. She said her son had been stopped 7 times in 1 year. No arrests. No charges. Just routine checks that left him more afraid to walk home at night than of the dark itself. "He's 17, she said, voice catching. "He doesn't run the streets. He gets straight A's. But that badge doesn't see grades. It sees skin. You know what I told him last week? I told him to stop wearing hoodies. Like that's the problem. Like he's the problem." A man followed, middle-aged, rough voice, heavy shoulders. He said he used to believe in the system until it failed him. Said he had called the police once after being harassed in a store, only to end up in cuffs himself when the responding officer assumed he was the aggressor. You start to question your own sanity, he said. You wonder if maybe you should have just stayed quiet. But staying quiet is what got us here, ain't it? Andre felt those words hit like stones dropped into still water. Each voice was a ripple, growing wider, reaching further. Then a young girl, no more than 14, stepped up. She didn't speak about policy or procedures. She said, I saw what they did to you on the news. My big brother said if it could happen to you, it could happen to anyone. I asked him if that meant I should be scared. He said, no, it means you should be ready. Are we ready, Mr. Davis? Andre stood. He didn't walk to the stage. He didn't take the mic. He just spoke from where he was, projecting not volume, but truth. We're not ready yet. Not completely. But we're trying. And that means something. That means we're facing it instead of running from it. That means we're not hiding anymore. The room was quiet, not because people had no words, but because they were thinking, processing. The silence was no longer a void. It was full of purpose. After the forum, Andre was approached by a man he recognized immediately. Officer Denton. A veteran. Known for his discipline, his stoicism, and his silence. Denton had never been accused of misconduct, but he also never stepped forward when others crossed lines. He approached slowly, hands in pockets. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, Denton began, but I figured now's the time when silence ain't safe anymore. Andre nodded but said nothing. Denton glanced around, then back at him. I've been on this force for over 2 decades. Seen things change and seen them stay the same. And I'll be honest, when you came in with all your policies and reforms, I thought you were gonna burn this place down. Thought you'd be the end of it. Andre finally spoke, calmly. Maybe it needed to end. Denton looked down. Yeah. Maybe it did. But I didn't see it then. I do now. And I want to be part of fixing it. If you'll let me. Andre looked him in the eye, searching for performative guilt, for political safety. But what he saw was honesty, late, but honest. He extended a hand. Then start by being the officer others feel safe going to. The one who doesn't just watch. The one who speaks. Denton shook his hand. I can do that. Later that night, Andre returned to his apartment for the first time in days. He stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the familiar quiet. No voices. No paperwork. No decisions demanding his breath. Just the silence he used to crave, now laced with memories that felt heavier than ever. He poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of his couch, scrolling through messages, hundreds of emails, texts, articles, all recounting, analyzing, praising, or criticizing his decisions. His eyes stopped on a video sent by his niece, Alyssa. It was a short clip from her school assembly. She stood in front of her classmates, talking about him. She didn't mention the arrest. She didn't mention his title. She just said, my uncle taught me that standing up for what's right might cost you everything. But if you don't stand, you lose yourself. He replayed it. Twice. The next morning, the Integrity Task Unit officially launched its first investigation, and the announcement was met with cautious optimism. Citizens began submitting anonymous reports. Whistleblowers from within the department provided insight into how certain misconduct was buried over the years. Andre created a safe space for these stories to be heard without retaliation. It wasn't just an administrative process, it was a moral excavation. In one internal meeting, Officer Harper brought up something that hadn't been discussed openly. We've done a lot to look at how race plays into misconduct, she said, but what about retaliation? What about the way women are silenced too? What about how officers who speak out get labeled troublemakers? Andre leaned forward, listening. Harper continued, voice steady but strong. If we want true reform, we have to talk about all of it. Not just racism. Misogyny. Homophobia. Corruption. If we only deal with one piece of the sickness, it grows back. Stronger. Smarter. Andre nodded. You're right. Let's open the scope. And let's do it transparently. Over the next week, a new wave of reforms were drafted. Protections for whistleblowers. Anonymous feedback loops. Public dashboards of officer behavior data. The pushback was instant. Union reps sent formal protests, city officials warned about budget implications, and some media outlets called it overreach. But for every critic, there were 5 supporters. Community leaders began meeting weekly with precinct captains. Civilian participation became the backbone of strategy. And slowly, quietly, the culture began to shift. Then came an unexpected moment. Jennings requested a meeting. It shocked everyone. He had been silent since his legal team advised him to avoid any direct contact. But now, with public pressure mounting and his own name synonymous with abuse, he asked for 10 minutes. Just 10. Andre agreed, reluctantly. They met in a small office at the Oversight Board headquarters. No cameras. No lawyers. Jennings sat with his hands folded, eyes down. I don't expect you to care what I say. Hell, I wouldn't if I were you. But I want to explain, not excuse. Andre said nothing. Jennings took a breath. I grew up in a house where fear was strength. Where you didn't ask questions, you followed orders. I joined the force thinking that made me righteous. But over the years, that fear became something else. It became contempt. I stopped seeing people. I saw threats. I saw weakness. And when I saw you at that gas station, I saw someone who didn't flinch. And that pissed me off. Because you weren't afraid. Andre's voice was low. I was used to it. Jennings looked up. I hated that. I hated that you were calm. Like you knew we were wrong before we did. And that made me feel powerless. And I used the badge to take that power back. That was the moment I crossed the line. The moment I became exactly what I swore I'd never be. Andre studied him carefully. And now? I'm done pretending I'm a good man. But I can be a useful one. If you'll let me, I'll testify. Not just about what happened. About everything I've seen. Everything I let happen. Andre leaned back, exhaled. Truth doesn't erase damage. But it can build bridges. Jennings stood. Then let's start building. When the meeting ended, Andre walked back to his office alone, heart heavier but strangely steadier. Because redemption, he realized, wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about owning the path forward. Not every apology would be accepted. Not every bridge would hold. But if even one could carry weight, then maybe the story didn't have to end in broken pieces. The city was watching. Waiting. But now, it wasn't just watching him. It was watching itself. And that, more than any speech or policy, was the beginning of something that felt like real change. The following week began with overcast skies, thick with a humid stillness that mirrored the air inside the precinct. The mood had shifted, no longer reactive chaos, but a deep, cautious reckoning. People walked a little slower, talked a little softer. The corridors no longer echoed with careless laughter or offhand remarks. There was a quiet accountability now, not because everyone agreed with the changes, but because everyone felt them. The Integrity Task Unit's work was intensifying. Investigations were uncovering not just individual wrongdoings but patterns, systems that had sustained misconduct through unspoken pacts of silence and fear. The evidence was undeniable, and yet, what struck Andre most wasn't just the magnitude, it was how much had been tolerated for so long simply because it was normal. André sat in his office with Mendoza across from him, stacks of reports between them. She was flipping through a statement from an officer who had worked in internal affairs for 9 years. The document detailed how reports were funneled, filtered, and softened to protect senior officers. In some cases, complaints were rewritten before being filed, corrected to match department-friendly language. André rubbed his temples, eyes tired, heart heavier with every page. Mendoza looked up at him, her voice low and rough from too many sleepless nights. "They're scared, André. But not just of you. They're scared of what this department looks like when the mask finally comes off." André leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before closing his eyes. "I keep thinking about that girl from the forum. The one who said her brother told her to be ready. I wonder what she's feeling now. I wonder if she thinks we're actually doing it, or if she's just waiting for the cycle to start again." Mendoza didn't respond right away. She let the weight of his words sit in the room like fog. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a letter. "This came to your office. Hand-delivered. No return address." André unfolded the paper. The handwriting was uneven, nervous. It wasn't signed. "I've been wearing this badge for 15 years. I've seen things I should have spoken up about. I've laughed at jokes that made my stomach turn. I've stayed silent when others were called out of their names. I didn't want to be the one who stood out. But after what happened to you, after seeing you walk back into that department with your head up, I realized silence is just another form of violence. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to help. I want to clean what we let rot." André folded the letter gently, placing it on his desk. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a long exhale, not relief, not pride, but something deeper. Resolve. Later that day, he held a closed-door session with select members of the department, officers from different precincts, ranks, and backgrounds. Some were open supporters. Others were skeptics who had, at the very least, agreed to listen. He began the meeting not with data or speeches, but with a simple question. "What do you want this place to be?" The room was quiet at first. Then one hand rose. Officer Harper spoke softly. "Safe. For everyone. Not just on the streets, but in here too." A beat passed. Another voice joined in. A Latino officer from the South Precinct nodded. "Fair. Not political. Just fair." Then another. "Respected. I'm tired of walking into stores and people looking at me like I'm the enemy. I want the badge to mean something again." André listened to each voice without interruption. Then he said, "That's what this is about. Not tearing everything down. Not punishing everyone. It's about rebuilding trust, from inside out. It's about making this department something our kids would be proud to join, not afraid of." A hand went up in the back. Officer Denton stood, clearing his throat. "But what about the ones who won't change? The ones still hiding behind the old way of doing things? What happens to them?" André didn't hesitate. "They'll be removed. Not quietly. Not protectively. The same way bad apples poisoned this place for years, we're going to remove them root and stem. And we're going to do it in the light, not in shadows." The weight of those words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was no pushback, no excuses. Just the sound of something rare in a room full of cops, agreement. That evening, André received a message from the mayor's office. She wanted to meet privately. He arrived after hours, the building mostly empty, except for a few night staffers. Her office was dim, warm light bouncing off the dark wooden panels. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They're pressuring me," she said bluntly. "Union reps, donors. Some council members. They're afraid you're turning this department into a political experiment." André met her eyes. "It's not politics. It's humanity." She sighed, walked toward the window. I believe in what you're doing. I do. But I need to know how far this goes. Because if it keeps escalating, it could break the city before it saves it. Andrei stood firm. Then maybe the city needed to break. Maybe we've been pretending we were whole for too long. She turned. If you push this to the edge, and something happens, violence, backlash, collapse, I need to know you're ready to take responsibility for that. Andrei's voice was steady. I've already taken responsibility for surviving something that should have broken me. Now I'm taking responsibility for making sure no one else has to. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Then don't stop. Back at his apartment, Andrei looked out over the city, his city. The same streets where he had once been a boy, walking home with his hoodie pulled tight, trying not to draw attention. The same corners where his friends were stopped, searched, harassed, and told to be grateful it wasn't worse. The same gas stations where judgment could be deadly. Now, those streets whispered something different. Not justice. Not yet. But maybe, finally, possibility. The following morning, he received a call from Carter. The young officer was shaken. I got a message, Carter said. Anonymous. Said I was siding with the enemy. Said if I keep backing your reforms, I won't last a year in this city. Andrei's voice didn't rise. Did you report it? I did. But I needed to hear it from you. Am I doing the right thing? Andrei paused. Right doesn't always feel safe. But it's still right. There was a long silence. Then Carter said, then I'll keep standing. Andrei hung up, pride swelling in his chest, not pride in the system, but in the people choosing to fix it. 2 days later, the final draft of the Reformation Plan was completed. The presentation was scheduled at City Hall. Andrei would deliver it publicly, with live media coverage, side by side with Mendoza, Harper, Denton, and Carter. For voices that represented the new vision, not perfect, but real. Andrei rehearsed the speech once, then put it down. He didn't want it memorized. He wanted it felt. When the day arrived, the crowd filled the chamber. Reporters. Officials. Community leaders. Officers. Activists. Even skeptics showed up, arms crossed, waiting for reasons not to believe. Andrei stepped forward and looked at every face before him. He spoke not of systems, but of stories. Not of statistics, but of survival. He told the story of a department that had lost its way, and a city that was tired of surviving and ready to live. He told the story of how injustice didn't begin with bullets or brutality, but with silence. And how that silence was no longer an option. As he ended the speech, the chamber stood, not all at once, but in waves, like a tide rising. Applause didn't erupt. It rolled, firm, steady, earned. Outside, as Andrei exited the building, a familiar voice called his name. It was Alyssa. She ran up, breathless, holding a small notebook. I took notes, she said. For my civics class. Andrei smiled. Did I pass? You passed, she said. But next time, maybe open with a joke. He laughed, heart light for the first time in a long while. And as he looked out at the crowd, at the city finally beginning to see itself, not in denial but in determination, he understood something simple, something undeniable. This was no longer his fight alone. It never had been. In the months that followed, the city transformed not through speeches or policies alone, but through the actions of the very people who had once been trapped in silence. The Integrity Task Unit continued its investigations, now fully integrated with a civilian review board and equipped with real-time transparency tools. Complaints that once disappeared into bureaucratic black holes now triggered immediate review processes. New officers entering the force were not just trained, they were mentored by those who had chosen to stand for something greater than tradition. And those who refused to adapt slowly began to resign, retire, or face formal accountability. The old guard didn't go quietly, but they went, displaced by something they could no longer control, truth. Officer Carter, once a quiet observer of corruption, emerged as one of the strongest new voices in the department. Promoted to liaison between the community and the department, he began leading youth outreach programs that humanized both sides of the badge. His sessions were real, raw, and personal. He didn't sugarcoat his fears, but he didn't let them stop him either. His bravery wasn't loud, it was persistent. His voice, once shaky, became a source of stability for many officers who needed to see someone young believe this system could actually become something worth protecting. Officer Harper became the first woman of color to lead the Internal Accountability Division. Her appointment came with controversy, but her impact silenced critics. She prioritized equity audits, launched department-wide anti-harassment initiatives, and created mandatory peer dialogue sessions where officers confronted their own biases without shame, but without escape either. She didn't preach reform, she demanded it. Not with fury, but with precision, clarity, and fire forged from experience. Under her leadership, the department didn't just change, it matured. Denton, the old-school officer once bound by silence, took early retirement after 25 years of service. But he didn't disappear. He partnered with community organizations to train former law enforcement on how to become advocates for police reform. In his farewell message to the department, he wrote, "Sometimes, the best way to honor the badge is to admit when you wore it wrong, and do something to make sure no one else has to carry that shame." His humility opened doors that policy couldn't. Even Jennings, the man whose actions had ignited the storm, played a role in the healing. After resigning, he testified in several cases, revealing patterns of misconduct and cover-ups that stretched back years. He faced backlash, threats, and public scorn, but he didn't run. He began speaking to cadets at local training academies, not as a hero, but as a warning. He stood before rooms full of fresh faces and told them exactly where the road of arrogance and unchecked power would lead. His past would never be erased, but his future was no longer bound to it. In choosing to confront his own failure, he gave others permission to confront theirs. As for Andre Davis, the man at the center of it all, his path didn't lead to a quiet desk or a ceremonial medal. He declined a federal appointment that would have taken him to Washington. He turned down multiple book deals and national speaking tours. What he chose instead was permanence. He stayed in Richmond. He became not just a figure of reform, but its steward. Every Friday, he held open office hours in the community, listening to concerns, suggestions, and sometimes just stories. People didn't have to make appointments. They just had to show up. And he was always there. One afternoon, months after the reforms had settled and the noise had quieted, Andre stood outside the same gas station where it all began. The pumps were quiet. The air was warm. He wasn't there for media. He wasn't there for closure. He was just there. A mother walked past with her son, maybe 10 years old. She recognized him and nodded with respect. The boy tugged at her hand and whispered something. She smiled and approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Davis," she said. "My son's been learning about what happened here in school. He wanted to ask if it still makes you angry." Andre looked at the boy, saw the innocence in his eyes, the cautious curiosity. "It used to," Andre said, kneeling to his level. "But now, it just reminds me that we have the power to change what's wrong, if we don't give up." The boy nodded like he understood more than most adults did. They walked away, and Andre turned back toward the city, the skyline rising in the distance like a promise. Richmond wasn't perfect. But it was better. Not because it had healed, but because it had stopped pretending it didn't hurt. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real change begins. Now take a moment, just you and this story. Ask yourself, where do you stand when silence is safest? Who do you become when no one's watching? The uniform, the title, the power, none of it means anything if it isn't used to protect, to serve, to uplift. Andre Davis was just one man. But his choice, to stay still in the face of injustice, to speak when the world expected silence, to lead when leadership meant being alone, that choice created a ripple that became a wave. So ask yourself, what will your ripple be? If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think in ways you hadn't before, leave a comment below and tell us what part hit hardest for you. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure stories like this aren't just entertainment, but reminders. And if you want to hear more stories that twist the expected and reveal the truth beneath the surface, make sure to subscribe to Tales of Twist. Hit that like button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next story.